Hello.
Welcome to Irish Passport.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Irish Passport.
I'm Tim McInerney.
I'm Naomi O'Leary.
We're friends.
Céim Naomi.
Anwar Fad Tim.
This is your passport to Irish culture, history and politics. I'm recording.
One,
two,
three. Okay. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Irish Passport podcast, a very special Fiaura episode, Naomi, where today we are looking at the enigmatic figure of Saint Bridget, one of Ireland's patron saints.
Fantastic, and about time we got round to her, to be honest, to give her due. So we're going to be digging deep here because perhaps more than any other figure in Irish Christianity, Saint Bridget provides a particularly vivid glimpse into the Christianisation of Gaelic Ireland and how that happened around the 5th century. And also the weird kind of merging of Christian and pre-Christian rituals in Irish traditions ever since.
Yes, indeed. Brigid herself, as we will see, is in many ways a strange kind of amalgam of an ancient Gaelic goddess and a possibly allegorical Christian heroine, possibly very real person. We'll discuss that in a little bit. While the celebrations associated with her combine also a festival of fire, which is, of course, Imbolc, with the solemn reverence of Ireland's second patron saint in St. Bridget's Day, the 1st of February.
We are, of course, recording this in St. Bridget's very own month, the month of February, which kicks off, of course, with St. Bridget's Day.
Yes, indeed. And we are a little bit late to mention this, but the 1st of February is also, of course, the first day of spring in Ireland.
Yeah, according to the Celtic calendar. So it might surprise some people who are still dealing with freezing winds and cold rain. But February is actually technically considered spring for Irish people. If you lived in Ireland, you might have encountered this. So if you see like depictions of seasons, they're grouped differently from what you might see elsewhere in the world. Spring begins on the 1st of February, summer begins on the 1st of May, autumn begins on the 1st of August, and winter on the 1st of November.
Yes, indeed. And I think we've brought this up in the podcast maybe one too many times before, but this is something that I personally did not realize was unique to Ireland for several years after I moved away from Ireland until I got into weird situations when I'm mentioning spring. But it was a bit of a shock to find out that other countries don't follow those dates.
There is a reason for this, of course. Why is it this way in Ireland and not elsewhere? Okay, so in Ireland, the seasons are still observed according to the Gaelic calendar. This is why. And the Gaelic calendar is very precise about the exact dates of spring. Summer, winter and autumn is actually inscribed into the language itself. So the Irish word for September is Man Fóir, which means middle autumn. And October is Dara Fóir, which means the end of autumn, just as one example.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't really get away from it. Also, each of the seasons have their own feast day. So summer begins with the Feast of Bealtaine on the 1st of May, which is the old Gaelic festival of fertility. Autumn begins with Lunasa, which is a festival for the harvest god Lu. Winter is marked by Samhain, of course, the festival of the dead and the other world. And spring was marked by Imbolc, which was the festival of purification and fire.
These seasonal divisions are actually written into the ancient landscape of Ireland. So famously, many of Ireland's megalithic tombs are aligned with the rising sun on a certain day of the year. It's very common for them to be built to align with the sunrise on one of those 4 festival days.
So, why, might you ask, are we still following this, ancient 1,000 years old seasonal calendar that's scribed into megalithic tombs? Do we really need to keep doing this? Well, for one thing, you could say that this tradition is, embedded really in Ireland. It's in the language, like we said. It's in the monuments. It's in the popular imagination, and it's kind of hard to shake off. But there's no reason why you would shake it off when this is how people have seen the world, have seen the weather, the seasons for thousands of years. There is another reason, though, that these 4 seasonal festivals of Gaelic Ireland are kind of alive so much, and that's because they were adapted as Christian feast days after the island became Christian in the 5th and 6th centuries AD. And they were still used to mark out the seasons in that way, long after their original connection to the changing of the year had been left behind.
Of course, the most famous example of this by far is Samhain, Festival of the Underworld, adapted as All Hallows Eve and eventually becoming Halloween, the international phenomenon at this point. The traditions we associate with Halloween today, like dressing up, trick-or-treating, bonfires and so on, these all have roots in pre-Christian celebrations in Gaelic Ireland. But they survived. They were adapted. They survived after Christianization. And of course, now they've escaped into the wild and been exported all over the world.
Right. And, once upon a time, Lunasa and Bealtaine were that big in their own way. They're a lot less high profile these days. They usually kind of pass more or less unnoticed. But they maintained a fair bit of importance until recently enough. So Bealtaine was Christianized as the festival of the Virgin Mary, May Day, of course, which is pretty clever trick on the part of the Catholic Church because it was originally the festival of sex and fertility, so they're kind of cleaning it up there, festival of virginity. But one common tradition that still goes on is the creation of May altars, where you bring blooming flowers to your local statue of the Virgin Mary on the 1st of May.
This is just like ragingly pagan behavior.
It's ragingly pagan, yeah, absolutely. I kind of had a realization of that as a child because we used to do this in school, right? We had a May altar in school, kind of staring at the blooms and the, let's be honest, kind of phallic-looking statue of the Virgin Mary. I was like, actually, wow, this is a festival of fertility, very clearly, But, it's such as bounty and fertility. It's so clear what's going on there with the flowers. But if you go by statues of the Virgin Mary in the countryside on May Day, you'll see them festooned with flowers still. People still do this.
Yeah.
On Lunasa, people used to light fires until really recently on hilltops, and they would hold athletic festivals as well. This went on right to the 20th century. It only survives in a few parts of Ireland today. So in County Mayo, still people traditionally climb the mountain of Croagh Patrick around Lunasa. So it's associated with Patrick, right? It's been Christianized that way. But the mountain itself used to be a site of pre-Christian sacredness. And in Kerry, one of your favourite festivals, Naomi, the Puck Fair, is held around Lunasa. That is where a goat is crowned king for 3 days. So that might have something to do with Lunasa as well. We're not sure.
That is my favourite for sure. So the final festival in bulk, however, now this is still very much observed in Ireland. And this brings us to the main subject of our podcast today because this one was Christianised as Saint Bridget's Day, celebrating Ireland's second patron saint, Brigid, a little bit less famous from the first patron Saint Patrick. What's interesting about this though is Saint Bridget herself is possibly a Christianised version of a much older figure from Gaelic Ireland, the goddess of poetry and healing, whose name was Brigid. In fact, it's not even sure if Saint Bridget was an actual person or if the stories about her were just a way of kind of reinventing this existing goddess as a Christian saint.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and it's actually quite political. It's very interesting how this whole question has a very political aspect to it, which we will discuss in a little bit.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. We should place ourselves back in 5th century Ireland, and let's just get a lay of the land. Okay, so this is pre-colonial Ireland. We're talking about pretty much an entirely Gaelic Ireland. The Vikings wouldn't start raiding for another 300 years. The English wouldn't show up for another 300 years after that. So this is Gaelic society in its heyday.
Yeah, so it's a super interesting time that we're looking at here for Gaelic Ireland for two main reasons. First of all, we see the introduction of Christianity. So this is really early for a territory that was outside the Roman Empire. It's really one of the first Northern European territories that becomes Christian. And we're not really sure how Christianity took hold on the island, but it's probably because of missionaries like St. Patrick, who were around the same time as Bridget. And what they probably did was manage to convert a few influential people, and that got the ball rolling basically from there. Right. So once you have a few big, powerful families who are Christian, then this influence grows. But I think we also can't underestimate the impact of the power of the idea of Christianity in this continent that's, mostly Christian. Like Ireland is surrounded by land, where you have this very powerful religion, that was the religion of the Roman Empire. So people would have heard about it and come into contact with it. Ideas travel fast. Like it's not like this was an alien new thing that's showing up on their doorstep. This could be something that people had been kind of thinking about and aware of for a while. So whatever, anyway, by the later 5th century, Christianity is taking hold in a big way in Ireland.
Okay. But it's still a transitional period, right? So a lot of people have been converted to Christianity, but there's still loads that haven't. And it's not necessarily volatile, You have to remember the Gaelic religion, it was polytheistic. So it wasn't necessarily a problem, to have another god around or even to integrate them as part of your pantheon.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have both worlds existing in the same space and time. And the second really interesting thing here then is that while Christianity is thriving in Ireland, really, across the sea, the Western Roman Empire is crumbling at the same time. So we kind of have Ireland becoming this new terrain for Christianity and the infrastructure of Christian Rome falling apart at the same time. So by the end of the 5th century, we have this odd situation where the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, pretty much falls into a state of collapse. And hordes of invaders from the north and the east stream across its borders and pillage the place and seize lands, and everything begins to fall apart for Rome. And weirdly, Ireland, which is this fairly safe haven in the middle of the Atlantic, becomes this odd little beacon of Christianity after that. While the rest of Europe is being ransacked, by these barbarians, many of the most important texts of Christianity were sent to Ireland for safekeeping. And while they were there, they were being transcribed by these kind of troops and troops of monks to make sure that they would survive, who were just recopying them into beautiful illuminated manuscripts.
Right. The data centers of the past, you could say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to do this, the Irish monks built like monastic cities, basically, and many of them survive on the landscape today. Most famously, there's Glendalough and Clonmacnoise. And these became international centres of learning for centuries. It's where Ireland began to establish its reputation as the land of saints and scholars. There were monastic cities, they were safe havens for texts, there were places where scribes would be busily copying them. And these monastic cities and all of the sort of scholarly people living there, that they existed side by side with non-Christian Gaelic society. And usually the monastic places would be under the patronage of a local Taoiseach or leader, and they would pay taxes to the clans that owned the land where they were.
Yes, so we have this fascinating situation for a few centuries in Ireland where a big part of society is Christian, but very often they're working within a non-Christian civil framework. So what we see is like the framework remaining how it is, basically. So life and taxes and the laws stay the same, but they're all becoming Christianized little by little through influence. Now, we said, it isn't necessarily a volatile situation, but there could be tension. And we can see this in a lot of the texts at the time. So the stories of Saint Patrick and Saint Bridget deal with this time. We see non-Christian societies and Christian societies kind of coming to blows, or coming close to blows.
They're interacting. Close to blows. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're interacting, yeah. So in one of the stories of Saint Patrick that a lot of people will know, for instance, the High King Lyra, so that's your ancestor, Naomi.
Lyra name check. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out. He sets about lighting ceremonial fires for one of the Gaelic festivals. But St. Patrick trumps him by lighting his own magical fire, which nobody can extinguish. So, this is all about kind of who's going to win the hearts of the people, right? Which one of these religions. You can kind of see it playing out here. It betrays a lot of what's going on at this point. And if you think about what's happening in a story like that, of which there are absolutely loads, Patrick is using a Gaelic non-Christian symbol. He's using the fire of this Gaelic festival, right? This ceremonial fire. But he's proclaiming it a Christian thing. So he's not changing the traditions. He's claiming them. He's kind of, he is assimilating them. And this is exactly what we can see happening to practically every aspect of Gaelic religion.
Wow. If you travel in the Irish countryside, right, you probably notice that there tend to be big crosses set up on the summit, the very tops of mountains. Very common all over the world, really. It means that it's probably a site of local pilgrimage, associated usually with one saint or another. But it's also almost certainly because it was a sacred site in pre-Christian Ireland. So one day a monk or a missionary or whoever it was trekked up there and planted a big cross and said, keep doing your ceremonies, keep doing what you're doing. But it's a Christian thing now. It's dedicated to the Christian God.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't even have to be as belligerent as that, really. So Ireland is absolutely covered in sacred wells, sacred trees, sacred hills, where people will often perform little rituals like leaving jewellery or drinking the water or tying ribbons on branches or something. These are all most likely pre-Christian sites. This is where a lot of Gaelic gods lived. Gaelic gods lived in rivers, famously, right? Lived in water sources. But today they are associated usually with a Christian saint. So you'll often see little Christian icons left there, little statues, little sacred medals, crosses, or candles or whatever. But they are kind of offerings, right? They've just been Christianized. And it's possible that some monk or missionary came along to wells or trees like this and said, okay, this is Christian now, kind of made everyone do it in a Christian way. But it's also possible, and maybe more likely, that it was just the people themselves who slowly started doing it in a Christian way. That the people who kept frequenting these places just projected their new Christian beliefs onto them while not changing the rituals. I mean, it's probable that that's the case because a lot of these places are super, super local and
they're very unofficial.
Very unofficial. I mean, we're talking of, just a village, a field outside the village, right? That a few people might pass every now and again. And, they might be associated even with families and stuff. Certain families have always done it, so they keep doing it, that kind of thing, So in that way, these places are, they don't need a missionary to come along and change them. They just kind of reflect the changing of the people who just keep using them. So
right.
It's, it's a very surface level, actually, the Christianization sometimes. Like, you're just changing the name, really, to St. Teresa's Well or whatever, but you're still doing the same rituals and you're hoping for the same results from the rituals.
Okay. It's a rebrand, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, we can see this process of Christianization in action. We can find evidence of it in ancient Irish mythology, right?
Yes. Okay, so when we're talking about the gods of Gaelic Ireland, we are looking at a fairly standard European polytheistic pantheon. So just like ancient Greece, ancient Rome, a lot of European religions, you have this group of gods and goddesses, each of whom is associated with a certain aspect of life or a mountain or something. And they're always fighting amongst themselves. They have their own personalities, they have their own motives. They might be interested in punishing a certain human, or they fall in love with like a bull or something very similar to like what you would know from the ancient world. And just like in the ancient world elsewhere in Europe, we have this whole mythology of stories about their interactions with mortals and demigods, and this is kind of their lore. This was a way of transmitting knowledge about the gods. And this mythology is super, super ancient. Nobody really knows how old. But for most of Irish history, it existed in oral tradition only. So it was passed along mainly by the Fili, so Gaelic society's poet class, who were kind of prided themselves in being able to recite whole cycles and epics of this mythology.
It was an oral tradition.
It was a completely oral tradition until the period of Christianization, when they were actually written down by Christian monks in those monastic cities. The exact same people who were copying the sacred texts of elsewhere in Europe. They were writing down this knowledge, basically.
They were the people who just tended to be writing stuff. So they're like,
exactly.
They're the ones that write.
That's what they do. They write. That's their job.
We get their slant on it.
Exactly. That's it. They put their spin down on these mythological tales, which is just basically Christianization in action. We can see it like happening in real time.
It's actually shows the power, really, of being able to write something down. Very powerful in terms of, promulgating a particular viewpoint and an opportunity, actually, because you actually get to rewrite history according to your own tastes, and you can edit out stuff and you can add in things. And so what you get are these ancient mythological stories, clearly taking place in a pre-Christian world, featuring gods, goddesses, magic, and so on. And then you get this sort of Christian facade sort of tacked on, like at the end. Very good example. The story of the children of Lear. Beautiful, tragic story about 3 children who are transformed into swans by their jealous stepmother. And they have to spend 900 years floating on the Great Lakes of Ireland in, tremendous suffering, while basically everyone they know dies around them. In the version of the story that was written down by monks, the transcribers gave it this happy ending, okay? So one day, the children of Lear hear the sound of a church bell, because Christians have now come to Ireland, and a Christian priest transforms them back into people, and even though they're like 900 years old, he manages to baptize them into the Christian faith before they die. Yeah, it's sort of like it's like a little edit just tacked on the end.
Yeah, and a very powerful edit, because the Christian monks were writing this at a time when there were loads of non-Christians around them, loads of very powerful non-Christians around them, and maybe those non-Christians' children would come into contact of the new version of the story, right? So it would be these kind of symbols from their culture, these parts of the world that they had known, but with this new Christian slant on it that kind of really does change the whole point of the story, right? That it's not a sad story anymore. It's a happy story because of Christianity. So we can see that the strategies of Christianization are fairly consistent here. And this is possibly something that we're seeing with the figure of Brigid, who is alive at this point, at exactly this point that this is happening. But before we can talk about Saint Bridget, we have to look at the goddess Brigid, who was a goddess within the Gaelic religion.
Okay, so let's start with the goddess Brigid then. According to ancient mythology, Brigid was one of the Tuatha De Danann. So these were traditionally thought of as the original inhabitants of Ireland before the arrival of the Gaels. They were supernatural beings. They mainly lived in a kind of spiritual realm underground, and they're also the origin of folklore about the Ishi, or the fairies, which survived, of course, well after Christianization.
So the goddess Brigid, like a lot of gods and goddesses in the Gaelic religion, was like a triplet, a triple goddess. There was possibly 3 goddesses actually called Brigid, 3 separate ones, but she probably is one of these triple deities. It was a very common thing. If you've actually ever been to the National Museum of Ireland, you might have seen a very beautiful stone head with 3 faces that represents one of these. Maybe look it up, listeners, because it looks really, really great. Maybe I'll put it up on Patreon, in fact. Anyway, Brigid, this person, Brigid or Bríd in Irish, it's actually a title. Bríd. It's not a name. It means something like the exalted one or the highest one. So it is possible that when people were calling a goddess Brigid, they were calling a lot of different goddesses Brigid, basically. Yeah, it's interesting. So if she is a triple deity, she's the goddess of poetry and healing and blacksmithing, which is quite an interesting combination of things. But yes, poetry, healing, and blacksmithing, all of which are kind of cool. And all of this associates her quite closely with animals. Now, poetry, remember, is super powerful as well. This isn't like being the patron saint of, nice verses. Poetry is this highly political thing. It's this seat of power, like we've discussed in previous episodes about the Gaels. Now, the blacksmithing might have something to do with animals. She's very closely associated with birthing animals. And blacksmithing, her symbol is a cauldron very often. And that might have something to do with animals becoming pregnant, because she's very much associated with the pregnancy of animals in spring. And that's probably why she was celebrated on Imbolc in February, because this is the time of year that would have signaled the beginning of lambing and calving season. So it's the time of year when when the sheep and the cows are pregnant. And the healing then is very associated with that as well. Saint Bridget is often prayed to in the case of sick animals, when your animals are, or when your pregnant animals in particular, are sick. To the point that people believe there's a few different ideas about the meaning of the word Imbolc, but it could come from the Irish Imbolg, which means in the belly, referring to the period of pregnancy in animals.
Okay. So Bríd was also known for her keening. So this is the traditional Irish practice of bewailing the dead. In Irish mythology, the goddess Bríd was said to be the first woman on earth to make the sound of weeping when her son Ruan was killed in battle. And the sound of her grief was said to have been so powerful that it echoed forever in Ireland. Whenever anyone was in mourning, they would wail the same sound through the practice of keening. The word keening, of course, comes from the Irish word keena, which is to weep. And it's a kind of styled vocal lament or grief song. And traditionally in Ireland, women would keen throughout the night at wakes and funerals as a way of honouring the dead. It's pretty rare nowadays, but does still go on some places. It's linked with the art of sean-nós singing, which can be done as well in the form of a lament.
Okay, yes. So this goddess, Brigid or Bríd, she has international equivalents. Lots of the Gaelic deities actually do. There are a lot of cognates or other equivalent deities in Europe. So a bit, like you have the Greek Zeus and you have the Roman Jupiter. You have the same thing with Gaelic deities, which makes sense when you remember that the Gaels were originally part of this greater Celtic world, right, which had existed throughout Europe. All of these other places speaking related languages, having some kind of cultural and social links between them. So we have Celtic gods and goddesses that appear again and again and again in different parts of the continent. So in much of Europe, Brigid was mirrored by the goddess Brigantia, or similar variations on that theme. So there is a town in Portugal called Bragança, which is named after her. There's one called Brigetio in Hungary. There's a Briançon in France. It's named after Brigid. There's loads of places, absolutely loads of places that come from the word Brigid.
Oh, wow. So we can already see these archetypes of gods and goddesses, they get assimilated or adapted into different religions over time. I suppose that's not that different from what we see then with Christianization. So let's move then to the Christian version of Bríd, up to Bridget.
Yes.
Tim, talk us through her.
Yes, I will. Okay. So this is quite an interesting transition that we're seeing here. So I said earlier that it's possible that maybe the figure of Saint Bridget is actually some kind of Christianization of the goddess Brigid, because we don't have any evidence really that anyone existed who being Saint Bridget. So we have no
a person,
like an actual person. However, that doesn't mean that she wasn't real. So it became kind of fashionable in the last few decades to say, yeah, she's not real. She's just this Christianization of the goddess Bridget that was kind of convenient during the Christianization of Ireland. But a lot of historians will say now that, well, there isn't that much evidence for Patrick and Colmcille either. It's just that the goddess Bridget exists, so we kind of dig more into the Saint Bridget and are maybe a little bit more critical of the idea of her existing. Also, another thing in her favor that a lot of historians will say is that even though, nobody at the time was writing about her, people did write about her in the 7th and 8th centuries, which isn't that long afterwards. So, they're not just going to make her up from 100 years ago. She had a grave, which is quite well attested to. Her grave was probably very much still around at that point, so there was somebody there. There's also no reason to believe that she wasn't there either. There's just... what's important really is that we have to understand that if she was a real person, she very much becomes a continuation of whatever was happening with the goddess.
Right. So if there was a real person, kind of merged with the goddess in the telling, the mythology of the two kind of came together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Also, we need to keep in mind that if she was a real person, the stories about her are not necessarily true. Same goes, of course, for St. Patrick and all the other saints, because that's not what stories about saints were for.
So one of the things that those monks were up to with all of their writing was writing hagiographies of saints. These hagiographies about saints' lives, praising the saints, they were never really intended to be literal truths. So often they were obvious retellings of stories from the Bible. They were moralistic tales. They had a didactic purpose. They were supposed to, teach Christian values. or they were kind of rehashing stories from other lives of saints. So it's part of the teaching of Christianity. It's part of the practice of spreading the faith rather than a sort of like historical record, right? So we have to bear that in mind when we're reading the descriptions of her life. We have to kind of take them with a grain of salt.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of creation of a myth when it comes to the life of Bridget is particularly interesting when we see how much the myth of her took into account the old role of the goddess Brigid. So if we think back to the goddess Bridget was the goddess of poetry, healing, blacksmiths, and pregnant animals. And Saint Bridget becomes the patron saint of, you guessed it, poetry, healing, blacksmiths, and pregnant animals. Like, she takes on the exact same role, right?
That's a bit of a giveaway. Okay.
It's a bit of a giveaway. Bridget's festival was Imbolc. Saint Bridget's festival was celebrated on the same day, which is now renamed to Saint Bridget's Day.
Right.
Worshipping of the goddess Bridget seems to have involved the lighting of purifying fires, while Saint Bridget was famous for keeping a perpetual fire burning in her church in Kildare. So, I mean, listen, it's just very much taking on the mantle of this, keeping in mind that the mythology of the goddess may have been affected by Bridget as well. Remember, non-Christian religions were in existence at the same time as Christian religions, so there's no reason why the goddess mightn't have kind of transformed to be a bit more like the saint at the same time as the saint is becoming a bit more like the goddess. There's no
they
reason.
They were merging mutually towards each other.
Exactly. It's not like one comes before the other. They're both existing very dynamically and alive at the same time. So the goddess and the saint basically seem to have played more or less the same social role, let's put it that way. And in a kind of ironic way, maybe, the Christianizing of the goddess, if that is just simply what happened, allowed the pre-Christian traditions to survive into the present day, because they just kept going with Saint Bridget, when otherwise they might have been long forgotten if Saint Bridget hadn't kept them up.
It's a kind of time capsule.
Yep.
So the stories about her life then, Bridget's life, are these just morality tales, like a little bit like the children of Lear, for example, getting baptized by a priest at the end?
It's possible. Probable. We don't know, of course. But they're still interesting, even as morality tales. They tell us, for one thing, a lot of information about Gaelic society and what Christianization was doing or how it was working in her lifetime in the 5th century. Okay,
so that they're like a cultural artifact of the time of their creation that contains information about the society that created it. So we can look at the stories then. Here's the tradition. According to tradition, Saint Bridget was born on the year 452 AD in the area of Fahart in County Louth, if I'm saying that right, a few kilometres north of Dundalk. There is a small shrine to her there today, but you can also see the remains of multiple raths. Those are the ring forts, important in Gaelic Ireland. This attests to the fact that this was an important centre of population back then. The modern name of this area actually refers to the clan to which supposedly Brigid belonged, which are the Fóharta. This clan is attested to have been particularly close to St. Patrick and to have converted to Christianity quite early on. Interestingly, they were known for supplying abbesses to monasteries, so there probably was a real link there, Famously, of course, St. Bridget became an abbess.
Yes, indeed. So the story goes that Bridget was actually a slave and her mother was a Christian, and when her mother's master, found out that she was pregnant, he was furious with her and he sold her to a druid. So this creates a narrative parallel, I suppose, with St. Patrick here straight away. St. Patrick was sold into slavery, and there seems to be a clear message in this. We have this idea of St. Patrick and St. Bridget overcoming the subjugation of slavery, in the Gaelic world as well, through the power of Christianity. So the kind of winning over their non-Christian masters and setting themselves free.
Also, it's a kind of, it brings them into the non-Christian world, right? They're kind of taken out of their family setting, and they're both of them, in both cases, they're brought into the other community, the non-Christian community. Okay, so this druid who buys Bridget's mother in the story, He turns out to be kind of okay. He sets them free once Bridget is born. And Bridget eventually goes back to live with her father, and there she starts performing miracles, much to everyone's chagrin.
Yes, much to everyone's chagrin, actually, because Bridget's religious calling does seem to involve giving away a lot of other people's stuff all the time, not without particularly asking them. So a famous story is how her father takes her to sell her again, I think, because she's so troublesome. She keeps giving his stuff away. So she takes him to sell her to another, her father, who's also her master, by the way. She still has the social status of slave. To sell her to like a local king. And while he's in negotiating with the king on, prices, I suppose, she gives away all his stuff. She gives his sword and his horse and everything to like beggars, and he comes back out and he's been completely fleeced. And the king sees what happens and says, "No, I don't want her. No, absolutely, you're stuck with her, I'm afraid." Another story is that she took her mother's entire store of butter and gave it away to the poor. And listen, she got the butter back because she's magic, right? So just makes the butter appear or something. But it's like, do you have to give other people's stuff away, though? Can you not give your own stuff away, Bridget? Or if you're magic, can you just make butter appear? Do you, what's the deal with, taking other people's hard-earned stuff and kind of deciding what should be rightfully done with it? It's not really yours to charity.
She's this sort of holy figure. I guess this is about charity, right? She just
yes.
The possessions mean nothing to her. She's giving it all away to other people.
Yes.
And another story about her is she is said to have had a magic cow, which was white with red ears, who went everywhere with her and which had infinite milk. So if you look at iconography of Saint Bridget, you'll often see the cow beside her.
Yes, and you'll sometimes see her represented with a sheep as well. And all that comes back to this festival of Imbolc. Remember, this festival coincided with lambing and calving season, which explains the cow, right? She's still, in her Christian manifestation, is still closely associated with this. But she also has associations with butter and milk. So remember, she gave away that butter, her mother's butter, and then made butter appear. She was also said to have been, I think she was washed in milk when she was born, or she would only drink milk when she was born. Just milk associations anyway. Because this is the time when cows and sheep would start producing milk, because of course they're lactating, right? Because they're pregnant and they're about to have babies. So after the long winter without butter and without milk, suddenly everyone gets access to butter and milk again, which was a huge food staple in Gaelic Ireland, of course, very animal-based society.
A story that every school child in Ireland knows about Bridget is how she managed to get land for her convent, okay? So the story goes that she asked a local Gaelic Taoiseach for land to build a church. And he was like, "No, of course not. You can't just have stuff for free, Bridget." And Bridget pleads with him, and she says that she only wants as much land as her cloak would cover. And she's probably talking about a brat, by the way, if you remember those. These were these big traditional mantles that were worn in Gaelic Ireland. Anyway, the king is kind of bemused by this, so he says, "Right, that's fine, go for it." And Bridget throws her cloak into the air, and when it floats back down to the ground, it is multiplied by size by 1,000, and it covers a huge area of land. And the king was so taken aback that he gave her the land straight away, terrified probably, and converted to Christianity on the spot.
Right. So something about these stories, there's something nice about these stories in that Bridget she is a bit of a badass. No, that's not the right word. She's a bit of a punk or something.
Okay.
She's kind of, she's operating outside the rules. I mean, giving away other people's stuff, I know I laughed about it, but there is something a little bit rock and roll about that. She just doesn't care, she just doesn't give a crap. And it's always
she can't be reined in.
Absolutely, exactly. No one can control her. So, and it's always in aid of people who are at the very bottom of the pile, and she's usually taking stuff away from people who have plenty of stuff. So, and she does come from this milieu. I mean, she is a slave. Oh, she's a freed slave, I suppose. But even after she's been freed from her bondage, she works for her father who had enslaved her in the first place. And she's a servant, But she comes from this milieu of wealth. She's hanging around chiefs and kings and stuff. So she has access to that world, even though she doesn't have direct kind of stake in it. And she's always kind of getting one over on these Gaelic chiefs or important people in order to save the lives of beggars or feed lepers or slaves or something. At some stage, she transforms water into beer and for lepers, which is like a funny little kind of transmogrification of the water into wine cliche. But yeah, I mean, she's that. She doesn't listen to authority, and she just wants to help the poor, which I think endears a lot of people to her.
Okay, yeah. Something that always strikes me about stories like this is I always think if you wanted to just make something up whole cloth, invent something, it would be less messy than these stories. These stories always have kind of complicated details that don't add to the plot, do you know what I mean? And quirks and stuff. Just, she was enslaved, but then she got free, but then she went back to her, and then she went there. You know, like this kind of stuff. This to me is like a little indication that it's not entirely fiction, because an entirely fictional account would be neater.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, and I think actually the figure of Brigid is messy enough that it's a good point in the favor of her being a real person. That like, why would you create someone like this fictionally? It sounds a lot more like a real person to me than it sounds like a fictional person, because it's not perfect enough, you know. Also keeping in mind,
it has the ring of veracity to it. Yeah,
it does. You kind of know people like this, don't you? I feel like I kind of know Bridgets who would do exactly that kind of stuff, you know. And it's not like there is no real rhyme nor reason to the creation of that character of a person, you know. Like she seems to have quite a consistent kind of personality, which rings a little bit true. Anyway, right.
That kind of speaks to the stories.
Absolutely. Keeping in mind that this is also a patriarchal society where it's not like a given that you create a kind of like very strong female character for no reason, you know, unless she was there and you can't ignore her.
So Brigid is closely connected to the town of Kildare. That is where she is said to have founded her abbey in the 5th century. The abbey was called Kildare, so that's Kildare. Means Church of the Oak. And tradition has it that before the abbey was built, she set up her monastic community simply in the shade of an oak tree. Nothing remains of that original church but its round tower, but by all accounts it was one of Ireland's major centres for Christianity for centuries. It was said that Bridget and 19 women kept a fire burning there at all times. And amazingly, we have fairly solid evidence over the following centuries to say that this perpetual fire was kept still burning for over 1,000 years after the founding of this abbey. It was finally put out during the English conquest of Ireland. Tragic. This was probably as a result of Henry VIII's order for the dissolution of monasteries in Ireland. It's very symbolic.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
fire of 1,000 years.
Yeah, 1,000 years. I mean, listen, we do have evidence for that. I had thought about this, and maybe, I mean, you never know, because there might have been a few 300 years there where the fire wasn't going, that just nobody mentioned. Like nobody's been watching it very consistently.
If it accidentally went out one time, you know, it's not like they're gonna like advertise it.
You know, if you were the person who let it go out, you'd just be like shaking and thinking, oh, they're gonna know. Anyway,
it was burning the whole time.
Burning the whole time. Yeah. There does seem to be more layers to this, though, and again, just fascinating crossovers with pre-Christianity. So we're pretty sure that there was a pre-Christian fire temple on the site of this abbey that Bridget sets up, and it's possibly dedicated to the goddess Brigid.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. Now, there's a lot of speculation about how this pre-Christian fire temple transitioned into a Christian abbey. And one theory, one fairly convincing theory, is that maybe one of the priestesses who kept a fire there going, probably, you know, maybe 19 women, you know, this seems like a very random number of people, but it like has kind of Vestal Virgin air to it, doesn't it? There's something very convincing about that. Maybe one of the priestesses who kept the pre-Christian fire converted to Christianity and took her whole like cult with her, basically. You know, that's entirely possible, that the temple became a Christian site instead, and that, you know, they kept the fire up, but like these maybe powerful people in society, you know, transformed this into a powerful center of Christianity. Another possibility, another theory, is that somebody like Saint Bridget came from the outside and, the temple was maybe waning, had lost its influence, and she built a Christian church on top of it and kind of took advantage of the site, convincing people to accept this new religion. And maybe if she did that, she might have taken the name of the goddess as a strategic measure. Like if she's keeping the fire going, why wouldn't she keep the name going, right? From the past, it would make sense. Yeah. The existence of Kildare Abbey also makes you think twice about the name. Kildare, Church of the Oak. The story is, like you said, that Saint Bridget just happened to found her church beneath an oak tree, a shady oak tree that was providing them shelter. But, like, the oak was this famously sacred tree also in the Gaelic religion. So it does seem like a little bit of a coincidence that it's the Church of the Oak. So is it possible that she was building her church there because specifically it was already considered special for other reasons in the pre-Christian world? Yeah.
Yeah. I can totally imagine that, like a sort of maybe slightly fading site that was famous for the old religion comes to exist side by side with, the newer Christianity in the same site, and like you said, with polytheism, they don't need to necessarily be in conflict, but maybe, Christianity is the one on the up and then gradually kind of gets assimilated. Mm-hmm. So one of the stories about Bridget refers, of course, to the famous Saint Bridget's cross. This is always associated with her. It's iconic in Ireland. According to this story, Bridget was tending to a dying Gaelic Taoiseach, and she convinced him on his deathbed to convert to Christianity. And as she sat with him, she's said to have taken up dried rushes from the floor and that she wove a cross to explain to him the story of Christ.
Indeed. Today, of course, the St. Bridget's Cross is one of the most recognisable pieces of iconography, really, in Ireland. It used to be the symbol of RTE, the national broadcaster, for ages. But you would also see one in every house, basically every house in the country, especially in more rural parts.
Yeah. It's another one that could seem like a Christian symbol at first glance, but it's very clearly steeped in pre-Christian tradition. So it's woven out of rushes, right? Look at it. If you actually look at it, firstly, it's not quite a cross, is it?
No.
It's a bit more like a swastika, actually. Missing some arms.
Yes. Indeed, yes. It is funny when it dawns on you, it's not a Nazi swastika, obviously. It's like this ancient sun cross symbol that has been used in iconography all over the world, and that was, of course, co-opted by the Nazis in the 1930s. But you see it all over Asia as well. You see it on Buddhist temples, and this is a really, really, really ancient symbol, but that's absolutely what this is. And it's not a cross at all. It's not shaped like a cross when you look at it.
There's even more reason. In some cases, in some parts of the country, the St. Bridget's Cross, it only actually has 3 spokes, so it doesn't even have 4. And in others, it's more like a big diamond. And in Ulster, it's a set of 4 diamonds. So again, it seems like a pre-Christian symbol that's been integrated into the Christian iconography of Ireland and adapted.
Yes, it does seem that way, and not even adapted that well. Once again, it's very surface level. The Christian part is almost a bit of a kind of cynical kind of like a
bit
veneer.
of an afterthought.
Just a bit of an afterthought, yeah, exactly. I'm sure people took the Christian dimension of all this very seriously. Of course they did. But it just seems like the pre-Christian rituals always remained the most important part of this stuff, and the Christian bit was just a bit of paint, like a paint to allow you to keep doing that stuff, basically. So the perpetual flame in Kildare, listen, fires, there's always been a place for fires in Christianity as well, but, keeping that flame alive in Kildare, it seems like this is blatantly kind of pre-Christian. Now, in the actual ritual of St. Bridget's Cross, we absolutely see this too. So they're not even trying to be Christian here, right? So wait until I walk you through. I didn't know this until I researched it. Do you know what you do with the St. Bridget's Cross, Naomi? Have you heard about this? You do.
Well,
okay.
I think I know. Okay, this is what I think you do.
Okay, go on.
So obviously you weave them out of the rushes. You used to do this in school. Sometimes using paper, but you traditionally do it out of these brushes that you pick and dry.
Right.
It's easy enough to learn how to do it. Then what you do is you burn it. And you burn it, and this is supposed to protect your house from fire. And I think you are supposed to clean all your house as well, do a big clean and burn all that stuff as well to protect the house from fire. Is that right? That's
Yes,
what I
this is
thought.
all true. Yes. I'd
Yeah,
forgotten
okay.
about the cleaning actually, but I actually remember being like told to clean on St. Bridget's Day. I think that must have
Spring
been an
clean.
excuse
Yeah.
to
The
get me to do a bit
spring
of
clean.
dusting or something.
Yeah.
But yes, you do clean the house on St. Bridget's Day traditionally. And you burn it at the end of the year. What you're supposed to burn is the old one from last year.
The old one from last
So
year.
you change them every year, and you burn it, and all of this is protecting your house, and burning it is supposed to make the land fertile as well. Now,
I see, with the ashes.
the ashes, exactly. Sometimes you bury it for the same reason.
And you hang the new one on your door, right?
And you hang the new one on your door. But before you get the new one, Naomi, you've got to do a whole lot of stuff. So the eldest daughter of the household has to go out on the day before St. Bridget's Day. So St. Bridget's Eve is actually, that's kind of the epicenter of the festival activities, really. Much like the day before Samhain. So off you go. The eldest daughter is supposed to go out and cut some bunches of rushes to make St. Bridget's crosses. But the rushes must then be left outside the door that day. Rushes, these things, they grow everywhere in Ireland. They're just big tufts of them in every field, so you wouldn't have to go that far. Now, you go about your day. The rushes are lying outside the door, and then the eldest daughter again of the household goes out and gets the rushes just before dinner time, so when dinner is almost ready. And she picks up the rushes, and she has to knock on the door, and she has to say these words. Let me see, I've got them noted down here somewhere. Gawagi ever glina, osculgi vor sula agus ligagi isja Bríd. So that means fall on your knees, open your eyes, and let Brigid in.
Okay.
She says that at the door, and everyone inside the house is supposed to respond Shedavaha, which means you are welcome. The eldest daughter then circles the house in the direction of the setting sun and repeats the ritual again. She knocks, says the words, gets her response, and then she circles the house again and repeats it a third time. And she does all this, and only then is she allowed to come in. Okay. Once she comes in, the rushes are laid out beside the fire to form a bed for Brigid, who is going to come in during the night. And beside the fire, you leave out offerings of milk and bread. And then you leave the door open overnight. And the idea is that Brigid comes in, sleeps beside the fire, gets up, leaves the next day, very politely, leaving no trace. And the family takes the rushes, which have now been blessed by Brigid's spiritual presence, and they make the crosses and hang them over the doorway of each house. And the crosses, as people will know, are protection charms. You put them over doorways and windows to protect these kind of entries into the house. And you do this every year, all over again.
I had no idea that as an eldest daughter, I had been so remiss and had never once performed this ritual, which is blatantly, we're blatantly in pre-Christian territory now. I'm going to go home and organise everyone for next year.
Yeah, you've missed it. You've just missed it this year. My God.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is you've been neglecting your duties.
I noticed my sister both wove a Bridget's cross and hung it up on her door, but I don't think she knew about this whole elaborate walking around thing.
Well, I mean, she doesn't have to do it anyway. It's not her brief, actually, as a younger daughter.
That's true. Yeah.
But I do love Saint Bridget's crosses, by the way. I think they're like just beautiful objects, and I wouldn't mind one. Yeah. Especially the really thick ones, when they're made really, really thick in the center. I think they look quite nice. And I keep meaning to get rushes here in February. I'm reminded every year, and to do a Patreon video for Patreon to make one with everyone, because like you say, they are very easy to make. But I just can't. I don't know where I would get a bunch of dried rushes on February the 1st in France, but if I come across them, maybe. I was thinking of going out to the park and like scalping them. Just
there probably aren't rushes growing in the park in Paris. There probably aren't.
By the pond or something, there might be some swans.
I think you see it in your mind's eye because you expect something like that to be growing there. But I'm telling you, there's not going to be rushes growing in Paris in the city park.
This is true. It is like I once went out in the early days of the podcast. I needed some like outside noises, some gentle, like pleasant outdoor noises, and I went to so far away. I took an hour metro, I think, to get to the furthest end of the city park, and all I could hear were runners just chatting with each other, people doing
Breathing
Pilates.
hard.
Yeah, exactly.
The slap of their souls on the concrete.
Yeah, exactly. Just literally
That's
no
peaceful
part
sounds.
where there's nature anywhere.
You were hoping for like a gentle breeze, some birds tweeting. No.
So, what time are you getting to Pilates? That was mainly it. Anyway, so now I forgot to mention the best and most pre-Christian part of all this are the little effigies of Brigid that are traditionally made by girls of the house. And they're placed in little miniature beds of rushes. This is all very rush-centric. So these little dolls are called Bríd. So that's like a Brigid doll, basically. And you dress them up in flowers and shells, which sounds quite nice.
It sounds nice and also a little bit scary if you didn't know what it was about. Okay, in some parts of the country, like in Clorgan, County Kerry, there are still annual processions on the eve of Saint Bridget's Day when men and women get dressed up in quite elaborate hats made from rushes. These do look terrifying, I can tell you. They do look terrifying. They parade through the town. Once again, they carry an effigy of Bríd, called a Bríd, which is supposed to purify the town and protect it from evil spirits for the year. And often they'll stop in local houses and pubs along the way and they have a bit of a dance or sing, and they're known as biddy boys.
It's something else to see that maybe listeners should put that into YouTube and see what they can find, because it's quite a scene.
It's a bit eerie.
Yes, it's all very Wicker Man, actually. It gets very Wicker Man very quickly when these rushes are involved, it has to be said.
And especially any clothing, any item to be worn made out of these rushes, you're instantly in Wicker Man territory.
You are a bit. Yeah, you are a bit. Now, I mean, just to describe those hats that they're wearing, by the way, because there's lots of straw-hatted celebrations that we have in Ireland that have these weird pre-Christian links. So sometimes there's the straw boys. I think that's January when the straw, or that's weddings, isn't it? When they come along, the straw boys. I can never get them right. Anyway, they have a kind of conical, like a conical hat that covers their faces. So it's a disguise that they wear. But the biddy boys aren't in disguise. They weave the rushes and the straw into kind of like braids, and then the braids are kind of woven into like a crown that goes on their head. It looks really cool. Like it's really quite something. Anyway, something else is Bridget's cloth. So Bríd is what it's called in Irish. This is a piece of cloth that you're supposed to leave out overnight before St. Bridget's Day. And Bridget is believed to come and lay her hands on it, giving it healing powers. And then this cloth can be used to treat sick animals, because she has that power over animals. Bridget also controls the weather. I forgot to mention this too. So Bridget can change the weather for you. So you can pray to St. Bridget if you
Way
need...
to bury the lead, Tim.
Oh, yeah, exactly. February 1st. And if you want to change the weather yourself, if you want to give it a whack, you just take your St. Bridget's cloth and you shake it at the wind and say, stop.
Oh.
And it should work. So give it a try, everyone.
It can't hurt, surely.
It can't hurt. I mean, listen... It has to work enough for somebody to believe it was true. Bridget's a bit like Santa, isn't she?
In some ways, I suppose, yeah. That she comes, visits the house by the fire and all this thing.
You leave milk out? Yeah.
Oh, the milk, of course. Yeah. Right, no, you're dead right. There's also a tradition that all fires should be kept burning on the eve of St. Bridget's Day and no doors should be locked. She should be free to come and go through the house. The day of 1st of February was traditionally considered a sowing day. So tradition held that anything was set to sow on that day would yield more than any other day. So this is all very fertility related, clearly.
Sowing, S-O-W, like sowing seeds, of course.
Yes, indeed, yes, sowing seeds.
Yes. So coming of spring and all that. Now, so that is Bridget. I want to come back to some of these issues then. The question of whether she's real and the political aspect of that, which I found so interesting. So, by the way, I checked whether, once I had done all the research for this episode, I said, I wonder has anyone else made a St. Bridget's episode in February on an Irish podcast? And about 11 different podcasts had.
Oh, no.
I was like, Oh no, we waited like 4 years to do. We've been talking about this every February that we need to do a Bridget podcast, and we always forget or something else comes up. And the one year that I do it, like everyone else did it too. But whatever, fine. But a lot of them. So there was a program on RTE. That was one thing I listened to. I think it dates from 2 or 3 years ago, maybe actually that one. It was to do with the new bank holiday that opened up. When did that? Was that last year or 2 years ago? I should know that really if I'm presenting you a podcast about Bridget. But listen, very recently a new bank holiday was declared on February the 1st for Bridget. So that was kind of the idea about it. And some of the historians on that show were bringing up I'll provide a link to this in the show notes, by the way. They were bringing up very interesting, political context of this idea that Bridget isn't real. So first of all, that there is a subtext of saying that Bridget was an invention of the Catholic Church in order to Christianize the goddess Brigid. That has a subtext that she was invented by a man, and it just takes away all the kind of reality of just this kind of famous big woman existing, which, yes, would be very annoying. And secondly, that she just gets a lot more interrogation. Her life gets a lot more interrogation than maybe St. Patrick's life, for instance. We just presume he was real because we have like sufficient evidence, but she gets this full treatment basically. But thirdly, and now this was brought up in a different podcast, which was absolutely fantastic, and that does date from this year, and this is Finn Dwyer's The Irish History podcast. He did a really good episode on Saint Bridget, which I would urge you to listen to, and I'll stick a link up maybe on Patreon as well if you want to go and listen. He was mentioned just very briefly something that really had occurred to me as well, and that was our kind of secret wish that she wasn't a saint. That because of Ireland's recent experience with the Catholic Church, especially in, let's say, everyone aged our age and younger, that there is this kind of desire for her not to be part of the Catholic Church, which is this kind of misogynistic, behemoth, right? And instead to have her all to ourselves, as this kind of just Irish woman who we can claim. And if we linked her with the goddess, then we could do that less problematically, right?
I see.
Yeah, which is interesting, I thought. I mean, I think that's definitely a thing. There was a time when I do remember people saying, she wasn't actually a real person. This is just the goddess in a kind of proud way, in a kind of way that it was like reclaiming the goddess, right? But in many ways, that's actually just not giving the real person what she deserves as well in a funny way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, think about this. If you become an abbess, the leader of an abbey at your time, so what are you actually doing? This is a way for women to become very powerful figures and to exert their own agency. So our kind of the hang-ups of the day about the church don't necessarily apply seamlessly to the past. This can be a liberating. People can find liberation through religion, as well as it being used for suppression in other contexts. So through abbeys, abbesses, that's a way that women were able to build independent lives at different points in history, to have an intellectual life. To get educated, to become powerful figures, to lead institutions, that were little, monastic cities like you were describing. So yeah, it's important not to sort of inadvertently bury what might be an actual historical figure, because, it's not the perfect figure for our preferences of today.
Absolutely, yes. And exactly like you say, and this was in a society where women very rarely had power. Women couldn't be Taoiseach, for instance, in the non-Christian civil society. So being an abbess, this was a hugely powerful position in a world where women didn't have hugely powerful positions. And like you say, it is this kind of symbolic thing. Across Europe, we have these very famous abbesses who managed to become philosophers and writers and great thinkers, all over Europe during the Middle Ages in particular, because of their position.
Forces as well.
Political forces, because of their position as abbesses. Yeah.
That's it. And as if you have a great faith as well at that time, that can be a source of power as well. So you may or may not turn out to be a saint or end up being considered a saint. But, I guess people believed at that time that women of profound faith were credible, you know, as kind of as sources of faith. So you could have like a holy man, but you could also have a holy woman. So it's not seen as there's a kind of equity there when it comes to faith that might not have existed in other arenas, which is interesting. You know, I was just about to ask you, Tim. I was like, what about that story about someone throwing? I actually had this completely confused in my mind. I thought someone told me that Saint Patrick threw nettles in Saint Bridget's face because he was jealous or something like that. I have it completely mixed up. I've looked it up. There was a saint who threw nettles in a woman's face, but apparently it was Saint Kevin of Glendalough. Doesn't sound very saintly to me, Kevin.
No, Kevin.
Apparently she was some sort of admirer who was following him. But yeah, I was told that it was his ex-girlfriend. Anyway, there's something about this story that it's just like, I bet that one's true because it just comes across as gossip. You know, even today, it's like, oh, there was a guy who threw nettles in a girl's face, you know.
Yeah.
You wouldn't invent it, you know. So it has to be true.
I mean, yeah, it could be true. Like, you do eat nettles, don't you? You can cook nettles. So there could have been a bunch of nettles on a table somewhere very easily that you could pick up.
Oh, no,
and...
she was following him, like, and he did it to get rid of her. Like, she was, yeah.
So he
picked
bent down
nettles
over the
matter.
side of the road. I see.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, not actually a bit of Saint Bridget law. Sorry about that. That was a little diversion.
Yeah. He needs to see someone about his anger issues at the very least. Or at least some coaching about communication. Yes, I mean, there absolutely does seem to be a kind of weird sense that Brigid is taking up too much space, actually, with the other saints. So there are 3 patron saints of Ireland. So it's Brigid and Patrick and Columkill. And listen, Columkill has kind of faded into the background to a large extent as well. But Brigid, I think one of the reasons that she's popular is that she's this kind of great counterbalance to Patrick. Like,
yeah,
Patrick is such a little prima donna, you know. he's such a little diva, going around, you know, telling you, "I'm the Lord here. Oh, I'm going to convert you all to Christianity." The way he acts is kind of petulant. While, like I said about Brigid, she is this punk. You know, she just doesn't care what anyone thinks, and she's not looking for recognition. She's not looking for praise. The stories about her make her a lot more appealing, really, as a kind of mythological figure than Saint Patrick.
She's kind of enfant terrible. It's so interesting because you've got this combination of, you get this this sense of veracity, of personality, of a real person being behind this. But at the same time, she has the baggage of paganism like almost no other saint. I mean, there's stuff about rushes and fires and, you know, animals bearing calves and walking around the house and all this stuff. Like, it's like overloaded with, like, clearly, you know, pre-Christian traditions that have come in. So she's clearly got that weight. What a fascinating figure. I have to say, I didn't know there was so much to it, and I'm fascinated that there's so much of this centered around the place of Kildare, and I'd love to know more about the ever burning fire that there was there. Perhaps you know, someone should get it going again.
Absolutely. Yeah, indeed. I mean, listen, it has to start somewhere for another 1,000 years. Don't worry, the whole planet will be on fire soon, so it will be perpetual.
Oh, God.
I had to drag us down, didn't I? We had a lovely little episode about Bridget, and here I come, wading us into the mud. One last thing I'd like to say then about this projection onto Bridget is the kind of projection of the idea of a goddess in the first place. So in a lot of kind of like a new age religion or iconography stuff where you kind of see kind of, I don't know, kind of hobby worship of this idea of Bridget, you'll see it described as the mother goddess, the great mother, you know, the mother this and the mother that, the mother goddess, the sacred feminine or whatever. And this, I mean, listen, these are real. There's lots of this in religious traditions of all sorts, but not particularly with Bridget. Like, she's not the mother goddess. That's completely just projected onto her. She's the goddess of poetry and healing and blacksmiths. Like, we have everything kind of attested to her already. She doesn't need to be a mother as well, you know. And in a way, that's kind of, I found it so fascinating that there's just so many different facets where people put on her what they want her to be, you know, in order to align with their worldview, basically, you know, like in the case of like what I said earlier, kind of wanting her to be against the Catholic Church just as much as we are, you know, like as a generation or whatever, you know, like, and it's the same with kind of pushing this mother idea on her because that feels that kind of ticks the boxes of my New Age religion. So you need to be that for me now, basically.
Right.
You know,
it's kind of warping her with our preferences, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
What a fascinating figure. Anyway, listen, we are not done with Brigid yet. We are going to continue talking about Brigid and about Gaelic Ireland a little bit and the Christianization of Gaelic Ireland in a half pint. And if you would like to listen to that half pint, you can find us on, where can you find us, Naomi?
It's patreon.com/The Irish Passport.
Indeed, exactly. And you can sign up there and subscribe and support the podcast along the way. But that's all from us for the moment. So thanks so much for listening as usual, and happy spring, everyone.
Happy spring. Slán for now.
Slán.